I wrote a paper in January 2018, published it as a PDF, posted it on our Facebook page, warning about Elon Musk. There were 6 pages just on Musk. I also warned about the military industrial tech complex and billionaires, faith so-called globalists, taking over our country and the world. Are you ready to watch? Is it too far-fetched to say that perhaps the ultimate goal is world domination? This was the goal of Adolf Hitler, world domination. Can enough public outcry this time stop the onslaught of what the fascists and the neo-Nazis tried to do in taking over all of Europe? They were already embedded in America. They were financed by FDR, the Roosevelts, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, these American bankers, the Prescott Bush family. The Nazis were financed by them. In 1932, we're going to talk about that in this podcast. Whose satellites that orbit 2/3 of the Earth control UPS, Amazon deliveries, GPS, and the tech billionaire giants' ability to be able to operate their business? The answer is President Musk. Donald Trump and Elon Musk want to develop an outer space weapon based in outer space. Do we want to trust them with our planet?
His companies were awarded 100 different contracts with 17 federal agencies. Many of these contracts have effectively enabled Musk to operate as a monopolist. SpaceX has cornered much of the rocket launch market, and his Starlink satellites have become crucial to the nation's national security, with nearly 2/3 of all active satellites now orbiting the Earth controlled by Musk.
Within 24 hours, Trump's token raked in as much as $14 billion in market cap. It was quickly followed by the launch of Melania's own crypto token, which saw a wave of inflows too. But as the president took office, the Trump token frenzy had many in the crypto community worried. They feared another meme coin craze could risk the legitimacy of an industry already beleaguered by scandal.
And now Donald Trump wants to have control of cryptocurrency and wants to have a reserve of cryptocurrency, digital currency.
When Elias Brotberger goes to work, he doesn't need ID, and he doesn't need money. In fact, much of what he needs to get through the day is hidden right there, just below the surface, in his hand. Embedded in his hand is a microchip that serves as his keys, his ID, and his wallet.
The most cutting-edge thing about Hannes Sjöblad isn't the phone in his hand. It's the microchip actually in his hand. A short moment of pain, not putting them off becoming part Swede, part machine.
Most people don't really understand how this technology works, what data is collected, how it's stored, or who might be able to get access to it legally or illegally.
Charges of its kind and aims to make the provision of government services more efficient.
The program gives ID cards to hundreds of millions of Indians who previously had none, but its rollout has been highly controversial.
1.15 billion, that's how many people the Indian government says are now enrolled in its biometric identification system, Aadhaar. Now, under the program, people can obtain government services through their fingerprints and eye scans, which match up with a unique 12-digit number that's assigned to them.
The Greek word used in the original text for the word mark is pronounced charagma.
Revelation chapter 13. God says in verse 18, wisdom is needed here. Let the one with understanding solve the meaning of the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. In the Hebrew, it's 616, which adds up to 13.
People will have the choice to accept the mark of the beast or not. If one is not compliant in taking this, they will be hunted, arrested, and executed. He that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Without the mark, one will not be able to buy or sell. Systems are being put in place around the world right now in preparation for this. Today, the world governments want to track every dollar you spend, track where you go, track what interests you, track everything about you, no matter what country you live in. Never before in human history have they been able to monitor people like they do now. And the technology is in place to do this. Electronic payments, digital footprints, facial recognition, implants, GPS, biometrics, social media, and the like. With billions of people in the world, technology is the only way that this could be done.
Does this line up with what God said in Revelation chapter 13? In Daniel chapter 11, verses at least, you can look at verses 28 through 45. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, about the world's final Antichrist. Jesus' own words in Matthew 20, well, the whole Bible's Jesus' words, but Jesus' words in Matthew 24 about the rapture of his church. God's word in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, especially verse 9, that God did not appoint us to the wrath of God, which will come after the tribulation of the world's final Antichrist. Now, in the study of eschatology, the world's final Antichrist is, the theologians always talk about this 7-year period. 7-year period. What's half of 7? 3.5. But nobody's considering, what did God say? What did God say in Revelation chapter 13? That there's two beasts, and one of them will be allowed to boast proud words for 42 months. Do the math. 3.5 years.
Let me ask you about another area that you campaigned on quite a lot, and there was a flurry of activity on, and that has to do with immigration.
Sure.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders signed by President Trump, specifically those allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action in a church service, at a school?
As a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? And I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked. So what's the point of the question?
You changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the question.
Exactly.
Giving the authority
Yes.
to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
But
the
that
law
also
everywhere
has
to
a
protect
knock-on
Americans.
effect, a chilling effect.
I think the U.S.
law
Conference of Catholic Bishops has frankly not been a good partner.
And you have to understand that the Bible prophesies about this world's final Antichrist. They will hate the harlot. They will strip her naked, meaning they will expose her. They will eat her flesh, and they will burn her with fire. Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. What does it mean to eat her flesh? Well, I tell you all the time that God's word uses the image of a woman to describe a global church. Now, many of these organizations, 170 heritage groups, and especially the Confederacy, were Roman Catholics in these southern states. Pope Pius IX controlled these Catholics, and Jefferson Davis in the South in the Confederacy and the Sulpician priests and the Jesuits edged them on, and every Roman Catholic archbishop in the country conspired to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. In case you didn't know, World War I was engineered by the Vatican. Cardinal Edward Manning, a son of a West India Company banker, in 1874 was recorded in the Tablet, the oldest Catholic newspaper in Europe, as stating that the only way to restore the temporal power of the Pope that was lost in 1870 with the overthrow of the Vatican by Giuseppe Garibaldi and the Italian revolutionary Black Hand Giuseppe Mazzini was to pit nation against nation in a continental war that would assure mutual destruction of the Pope's enemies and restored the Vatican as a power in the world. Now, of course, all this is taking place. The United States Congress had ceased all diplomatic relations with the Vatican after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln from 1865, and they did not reestablish relationships until 1984 under Ronald Wilson Reagan. And the history of Schenectady as being an international hub, Alco trains for World War I, World War II, you have to go back to the history of Mario A. Pacelli and James Sirigliano. In January 1918, they opened the Italian-American Real Estate Insurance Company in Schenectady. The interesting part was that Mario Pacelli and Roman Street in Schenectady's Little Italy was where his office was located at 15 Roman Street. And James Sirigliano of 354 Edison Avenue, they opened this Italian-American Real Estate and Insurance Company. The Rockefeller family financed Adolf Hitler's election campaign. In 1926, with participation of the Rockefeller Bank, Dillon, Reed and Company, the second largest industrial monopoly in Germany after IG Farben, emerged. This was a bank that was involved with Steel Trust, Fritz Thyssen, Flick, Wolf, and Fegler, etc. IG Farben, the main supplier of the German war machine, financed 45% of the election campaign of Hitler in 1930 and was under the control of the Rockefellers, Standard Oil of California, and Standard Oil of New Jersey. January 4th, 1932, there was a meeting held by the British financier, governor of the Bank of England, and Adolf Hitler, who became chancellor a few months later in May 1932. At this meeting, an agreement on the financing of the Nazi Party was reached. This meeting was also attended by U.S. policymakers and the Dulles brothers, Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, something which their biographers do not like to mention. But you have to ask yourself, who has always been the owners and the controllers of the Bank of England? That is the Rothschild family of England, of Ireland, of Israel, and the United States, which merged with the Rockefeller family, which today is known as J.P. Morgan Chase. A year later, on January 14, 1933, another meeting was held between Adolf Hitler and Germany's finance minister, as well as Hitler's economic advisor, Wilhelm Kepler, and it took place where Hitler's program was fully approved. Upon the accession of Adolf Hitler as Chancellor in March 1933, a massive privatization program was initiated which bears the fingerprints of Wall Street. William Averell Harriman, George Herbert Walker, Prescott Sheldon Bush, the Dulles brothers. Now, Dr. Sachet was reappointed in March 1933 by Adolf Hitler to the position of president of the Reichsbank. That's the Nazi Third Reich Bank. And he was invited to the White House in May 1933 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. After this meeting with the U.S. president and the Bushes and the Dulleses and the Harrimans and the Herbert Walkers and all these other Wall Street bankers, America allocated Germany new loans totaling $1 billion, equivalent to $23.7 billion in 2023. The American cooperation with the German military industrial complex was so intense and pervasive that by 1933, the key sectors of German industry and large banks such as Deutsche Bank, Dresdner Bank, Danat Bank, etc., were under the control of the American financial capital and these Nazi bankers. The political force that was intended to play a crucial role in Anglo-American plans was being simultaneously prepared. We are talking about the funding of the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler personally. Fascist Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was Adolf Hitler's hero and mentor. Adolf Hitler became Germany's chancellor on January 30th, 1933. The Reich Concordat between the Holy See Vatican and the Nazi German Third Reich was signed on July 20th, 1933, and is still in existence today in Germany. So that was July 20th, 1933. Check this out. The Pope ratified the agreement 2 months later on September 10th, 1933. And then on October 7th, 1933, the Italian Club and For the Italians opened in Schenectady, New York at 114 Union Street. The registered president was a dentist named Harry Mayhoff, who had an office at 331 State Street. The vice president was Fred D. Cherry of 1064 Parkwood Boulevard. The treasurer was Jesse Rossi, who resided at 1098 Parkwood Boulevard in Schenectady, which at the time was owned by Temple Gates of Heaven. And the property had been owned by Temple Gates of Heaven from 1920 to 1951. You can see the Schenectady County Clerk Book 729, page 552. And the secretary, Hyman Pliskin, lived at 751 Albany Street. Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli visited the United States after the signing of the Reich Concordat in 1936 and was invited to the Jesuits' Fordham University, where he received an honorary law degree. This is the connection to the Nazi Third Reich and the Capital District, as well as New York State. J.P. Morgan, through General Electric, controlled the German radio and electrical industry via these organizations, and owned up to, by 1933, owned up to 30% of the shares of General Electric through the telecom company ITT, 40% of the telephone network in Germany. In addition, they owned 30% stake in the aircraft manufacturing company Focke-Wulf. General Motors, belonging to the DuPont family, established control over Opel. Henry Ford controlled 100% of the shares of Volkswagen.
Pacelli remained in Germany, which he loved, until 1929. Side by side, he would stand with the Germans as they went through the hell that was the Weimar Republic, and he was immediately right in the thick of things. In Bavaria, of course, there was a left-wing revolution led by Kurt Eisner. Pacelli described him in the following terms, quote, atheist, radical socialist, propagandist, what's more, a Galician Jew, end quote. It was not just words that Pacelli offered, but action, too, and he refused to have any contact with Eisner or his regime. Any interactions, he reasoned, would offer Eisner some kind of legitimacy which he did not deserve. On the 21st of February, Kurt Eisner was assassinated by a Catholic, and the regime became even more revolutionary and anti-Catholic. Max Levin, the new leader, was described by Pacelli as a repulsive, dirty Russian Jew. On the 3rd of May, the palace of the Nunciature came under gunfire by government troops, and when this ceased, 3 officials and 20 heavily armed troops began to bang on the door. The revolutionaries claimed that shots had been fired from the building towards their soldiers, and they demanded to search the premises. Pacelli was ill at a clinic that evening, but the incident was an eye-opener nonetheless. Regardless, the Red Reign of Terror did not last in Bavaria, and Pacelli saw the best hope now to be the Catholic Centre Party, and indeed, the Centre Party made sure some important pro-papal elements were inserted into the Weimar Constitution. State intervention in the assignment of ecclesiastical posts was banned, and Germans were guaranteed the right to form and join associations.
It has taken me years to understand how and why the German Ski Club of New York, established in 1929. These guys were right-wing, ultra-right conservative Republicans, and by the time 1984 rolled around, I had to make a decision where to go to college. One of the guys was Colonel Fred Mark Chesbrough, who is now retired after 27 years and 10 months flying clandestine planes for the Army. He was also stationed in Hawaii. And I met up with these Kingsmen whose ancestors happened to be Nazi Third Reich officers at the German Ski Club of New York. Now, I had traveled to Munich, Germany, and Portugal on Porsche's dime, and was the only Caribbean French mixed race fam writer on our team of over 30 travel writers from Asia, Germany, North America, and South America. It was not until years later that I woke up and realized why the top brass at Porsche AG in Europe and Germany loved me and always sat me at the head table with them at banquets. I was their brand building and public image repair token. Well, you know, this CIA Central Intelligence Agency, Bush post World War II Nazi dummy company, Harbinger Group of Rochester, New York, was part of the Zapata Petroleum Corporation. Now, the Zapata Corporation, you got to understand, the Bushes, they eventually ended up in Rochester, New York. They ended up moving to New Jersey. They ended up moving to Connecticut. And they were also, as you know now, big Texas guys in the oil industry. So Zapata was a dummy company for the Central Intelligence Agency. And how it started was this Nazi banker In 1920, George Herbert Walker became the president of this bank, an investment firm, and quickly arranged the credits that William Averell Harriman needed to take control of this Hamburg bank. So George Herbert Walker decided to give his son-in-law, Prescott Sheldon Bush, a big break. Walker made Bush a vice president of Harriman and Company, and Prescott Bush's new office employed many of his classmates from his Yale Skull and Bones class of 1917. Watch this video and let's get into looking at how the rise of fascism, Bolshevism, and Nazism in 1919, especially with the help of the Jesuits at Georgetown University and the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service, which was established 6 years before the United States had its own Foreign Service office. The Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service is now named after Saudi Prince Al Walid, who, with United Arab Emirates, financed the 9/11 attacks on America. Guy Edmund A. Walsh, he was a Jesuit priest. You name it, he was basically an international player before the United States had a Foreign Service office. And he was traveling to Russia. He was making missions into the Pacific region and as well as Mexico. So this is interesting that there's now this whole tariff thing going on between Mexico, Canada, the United States. Well, this goes all the way back to my Skull and Bones buddies. Now, I got to tell you that Pi Upsilon was founded on Union College on their campus, and this extended to Yale University and all the other elite institutions and became Skull and Bones, which today is known as the Russell Trust Association, to the Nazi Third Reich. And the bank was located at 39 Broadway in New York City. And there were the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles. He was a politician also, and a lawyer and a diplomat who served as United States Secretary of State. And Allen Dulles was one of the guys who was instrumental in developing the CIA's Project MK Ultra mind control technology, which was supposed to be outlawed by Congress in the 70s under the Church Committee, but still continues on today. So Dr. Ludwig, which the Jewish Community Center in Niskayuna, New York, is named after him and his wife Dorothy, was our mentor in Mount Pleasant High School. He was also a Master Sergeant veteran. He was a clinical sociologist. And this Harriman State Park, where I used to take my kids when they were young to picnic at Bear Mountain, was developed by a donation from the Harriman family. They had 30,000 acres in Rockland County and Orange County, New York, and they donated 10,000 acres to the state to make Harriman State Park. The funny part about this was, while I was hanging out with my buddies from the King's College, they invited me to a summer solstice and for the German Ski Club of New York inside Harriman State Park, and I couldn't figure out why and how they were able to own private land and a campground in this park, and it is because of this donation from William Averell Harriman's parents, Edward and his mother, that donated the land for the German Ski Club of New York. These guys, the organization, the German Ski Club of New York, was founded in 1929.
In 1870, Italian authorities attacked the Papal States. Additionally, the Catholic Church was not allowed to take part in peace treaties after World War I. The Pope did not appear in public, and Catholics could not work in public institutions. However, as a way to end this conflict, on February 11, 1929, Pope Pius XI and King Vittorio Emanuele sent their representatives, Cardinal Pietro Gasparri and Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini, to sign the Lateran Treaty. Thus, after 40 years of tension, the Holy See recovered its rights in its own territory in Rome.
Benito Mussolini was an Italian politician and a journalist, but he was a bit more than that. He was actually the dictator of Italy, and he led the National Fascist Party from 1922.
He actually got support for his new newspaper from Italian industrialists who would have something to benefit from Italy going to war. And he also got support from the British and French governments.
Plans of national domination, multiple powerful members, and was led by a man of unknown ambitions, who was Licio Gelli. Gelli was the leader of a secret organization called Propaganda II, a Masonic lodge that had hundreds of confirmed members. Gelli was born in 1919 in Pistoia. He was raised during fascist times, and he was quite devoted to the ideology. After the war, he was enrolled as a secret agent for the American and British intelligence. By the end of his career in the Secret Service in the mid-50s, Gelli had built a vast net of connections, ranging from the richest Western capitalists to the sketchiest sympathizers of Nazism in Argentina. In 1956, he became the commercial director of Permaflex, a company that sold mattresses. Although many consider this as some sort of cover of his real background activities. In 1970, Gelli will become the leader of Propaganda II, anti-leftist, pseudo-Masonic, and radical right secret organization that actively fueled the tensions and the terror that prevailed over Italy at the time. Gelli enrolled most of the members on the published list and beyond.
Infamous for its involvement in political intrigue, financial corruption, and criminal activities during the latter half of the 20th century. The Lodge, which was originally created as part of the wider Masonic tradition, evolved into a shadowy power network that infiltrated Italian politics, business, and even media. The P2 Lodge was founded in 1877 as a part of the Italian Grand Orient Freemasonry, originally intended as a lodge for elites within Italian society. Masonic lodges, including P2, were common in Europe and known for gathering intellectuals, politicians, and businessmen to discuss philosophical, social, and political matters. It served as a lodge primarily for aristocrats and politicians who wanted to maintain a low profile in their Masonic activities. In the 1960s, the P2 Lodge began its transformation into a more secretive and politically active organization under the leadership of Licio Gelli. Gelli, an enigmatic figure with ties to fascist regimes during World War II, took control of the lodge in 1966 and used it as a tool to further his personal ambitions and political agenda. Licio Gelli had a controversial past, including working as a liaison for Mussolini's regime, and later cultivating ties with right-wing governments across Europe and South America. His charisma and political connections allowed him to shape the lodge into a vehicle for covert operations.
Ms. Maloney campaigned on culture war issues such as putting Christian identity, patriotism front and center. Ms. Maloney's victory comes 100 years after dictator Benito Mussolini came to power in October 1922, and much of the mainstream media today refers to Brothers of Italy as far right. Ms. Maloney says that fascism is a part of history.
Ignatius Loyola, 1491 to 1556, founder of the Society of Jesus and its first superior general. Let all with such artfulness gain the ascendant over princes, noblemen, and the magistrates of every place, that they may be ready at our beck, even to sacrifice their nearest relations and most intimate friends when we say it is for our interest and advantage.
But during World War II, these guys went back to Germany and they then snuck back into the United States through South America and Canada. And I interviewed a bunch of Germans there at this summer solstice, and they talked to me about their experience as Nazi officers during World War II.
1930s, Nazi Germany. Democracy is destroyed, and the Nazi Party eliminated all political opposition. All power is centralized in Hitler's person, who became absolute dictator of Germany under the title of Führer, or leader. The first concentration camps are already established, and Jews are persecuted and imprisoned. To influence public opinion, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels makes effective use of film and mass rallies. One of the most prominent representatives of this criminal Nazi regime and unofficial First Lady of the Third Reich is his wife, Magda Goebbels. Magda Goebbels was born on 11 November 1901 in Berlin as Johanna Maria Magdalena Ritzel. Her father, Oskar Ritzel, was a rich building contractor and engineer, and her mother Augusta was a servant. They married around the time of Magda's birth, and they divorced 3 years later. In 1908, Magda's mother Augusta married Richard Friedlander, a wealthy merchant from a Jewish German family. Magda bore the surname Friedlander after she was adopted by her Jewish stepfather, and they had a good relationship. The family lived in Brussels, where Magda was enrolled at the Ursuline convent and received the basics of her excellent education. After the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the family moved to Berlin, the same year Magda's mother divorced Richard Friedlander.
In 1918, the Pope had commissioned Pacelli to negotiate an agreement in which the Vatican would provide asylum for the imprisoned Tsar and his family, but before these talks could be finalized, the Tsar's family were executed.
In 1920, traveling to school by train, Magda met Gunther Quandt, a widow twice her age. He turned out to be one of the richest industrialists in Germany, and he fell in love with Magda. Quandt proposed to Magda, but demanded that she change her Jewish surname from Friedlander to Ritzel. She agreed, and they got married in January 1921. Their son Harold was born in November the same year. To Magda, this marriage opened the door to unlimited wealth and social connections. However, while Magda was looking after their son Harold, as well as Quandt's 2 sons from his first marriage and 3 children of a deceased friend, Gunther was busy building his business empire.
Okay, we've got to back up here because Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli of the Vatican was the ambassador to Germany from 1920. His post was moved to Berlin in 1925, and the Vatican was playing the British, the United States, Germany, France, and Italy against each other to vie for power. And that is always how the Jesuits have worked through time. They play both sides against the other. And I have reminded you before, Cardinal Edward Manning's 1874 writings clarified that there needed to be a World War I, a continental war, to restore the Pope's temporal power in the world, and that the way that it was devised that the Jesuits and the Vatican would do this is by pitting nation against nation, and they were anti-Semites. They believed that the Jews killed Jesus. So Hyman Arlos Araf was a threat to the Vatican, and this is interesting history.
In March 1924, Pacelli finally wrapped up the Concordat with Bavaria, in which the Church was granted broad power over the educational system. The following year, Pacelli finally set off for Berlin. Here, he was given 3 main tasks by Pope Pius XI. He was to negotiate the Concordats with both the state of Prussia and Germany itself, and lastly, he was to secretly negotiate an agreement with the Soviet ambassador in Berlin to resolve differences between the papacy and the USSR. This latter task was, of course, a difficult one.
However, Magda's stepfather was not the only Jewish man who played an important part in her life. During her school days, Magda met a young Jewish man named Chaim Arlosoroff. Arlosorov was then a socialist Zionist, and he would later become an important politician. The two fell in love. According to Haim's sister, Magda wore a necklace with the Star of David that Haim gave her, and they even planned to emigrate to the British-ruled Palestine together. However, they broke up, and he left for Palestine in 1924. Life as a young rich wife and mother did not satisfy Magda, and she found a lover. When her husband discovered she had had an affair, they separated and divorced in 1929, when the Great Economic Depression started. Even though the economic crisis hit Germany hard, it did not impact Magda's lifestyle at all. She led the life of a wealthy divorcee, as Magda's ex-husband was paying her a generous alimony, which enabled Magda to maintain the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. She was young and independent, but bored. When in 1930, Magda attended a meeting of the Nazi Party, her life changed completely. She met Joseph Goebbels, who would become the Nazi Minister of Propaganda, and Adolf Hitler. Magda and Joseph became lovers, and they got married in December 1931. Adolf Hitler was the best man at their wedding, and he was very fond of Magda, and he had become the couple's close friend, often staying at their luxurious Berlin apartment. Magda and Joseph Goebbels had 6 children, each with names starting with H in honor of Hitler, who was often photographed playing with them. In 1933, Hitler was appointed as Germany's new chancellor, and Magda became one of the most prominent figures of the Nazi regime and unofficial First Lady of the Third Reich. And Hitler had created a public image of a celibate man dedicated entirely to Nazi Germany with no domestic life.
It's important to note that in 1933, how Adolf Hitler was able to rise to power was with the signing of the 1933 Reich Concordat, which allowed the Vatican to protect its financial rights in Nazi Germany. This was signed at the Vatican with Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, who would become the future Pope Pius XII.
When the Nazis came into power in January 1933, Joseph Goebbels had to deal with the Jewish past of his wife too. When they started to persecute Jews in Germany and restrict their civil and human rights, Haim Arlosorov, Magda's ex-Jewish lover, was then an important political figure in Palestine. Arlosorov came into Germany in 1933 to negotiate the Havara Agreement, which would allow the immigration of German Jews to Palestine, along with most of their property. It is believed that he tried to contact Magda to help him secure this agreement, as he learned that his ex-girlfriend was married to one of the Nazi top leaders. However, they did not meet, and allegedly she warned Arlosorov that his life was in danger, and he should leave Germany immediately. 2 days after his return from Germany, he was assassinated on a beach in Tel Aviv.
Arlosorov was bringing Jews from Europe to the Holy Land and establishing what they considered to be illegal settlements.
Even though the Goebbels family was presented as the ideal family of the Third Reich to the public, the reality was very different. Joseph was a womanizer, and Magda knew about it. With one of his mistresses, famous Czech actress Lida Barova, Joseph Goebbels fell in love, and their affair lasted from around the Berlin Olympics in 1936 until 1938. After Magda approached Hitler and asked him for permission to divorce her husband, Hitler stepped in and ordered his propaganda minister to stop the affair at once. As a result, Barova fled to Prague, and Hitler arranged for publicity photos to be taken of himself with a reconciled couple in October 1938. However, Magda too had had an affair with Karl Hunke, who was a state secretary in the propaganda ministry.
A series of recently opened Vatican archives are shedding new light on the relationship between Pope Pius XII and Adolf Hitler as he led Nazi Germany during World War II. Amna Nawaz looks at what we are learning and how it changes our thinking about the Vatican during that time.
Judy, in 2020, the Vatican released millions of documents on Pope Pius XII that were previously hidden from public view. These include transcripts of negotiations between the Pope and Nazis. A new book published today takes a deeper look at these revelations. Historian David Kurtzer is the author of that book. It's called The Pope at War: The Secret History of Pius XII, Mussolini, and Hitler. And he joins me now. David Kurtzer, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you for being here. So a lot of folks know previous versions of history. These meetings that we now know happened between the Pope and a personal envoy of Hitler. What did we learn about those? What were those talks like?
Well, probably the most shocking finding from these newly opened Vatican archives that just opened 2 years ago after 50 years of pressure and interest in being able to see what they contain is that within weeks of Pius XII being elected Pope, he's elected in early 1939, Hitler saw an opportunity and decided to send a personal envoy, who himself is a rather colorful character, the great-grandson of Queen Victoria of England, a Nazi prince who was married to the daughter of the King of Italy. And he would begin to shuttle back and forth between Hitler and the Pope over the next 2 years, engaged in secret negotiations. We didn't know about these until just now.
In 1933, Prescott Bush was alleged to have connections with the Business Plot, a political conspiracy aimed at overthrowing President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The plot intended to recruit retired Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler to lead a coup against Roosevelt, supposedly backed by prominent business leaders, including Bush. Though Butler testified to Congress about these claims, no evidence conclusively linked Bush to the plot, and it has remained a topic of historical debate. Skull and Bones is known for its secrecy and the significant number of influential American leaders among its members, including several U.S. presidents, Congress members, and prominent businessmen. The Society's network provided Bush with invaluable connections that supported his future endeavors in banking and politics. The rituals and activities of Skull and Bones are shrouded in secrecy, but its influence in American elite circles is well documented. For Prescott Bush, the Society was not just a college club. It was a gateway to a network of power that would help shape his career and, subsequently, those of his descendants. His involvement is a key example of how secret societies have been perceived to play a role in the governance and business leadership of the United States. He joined the firm of Brown Brothers Harriman, becoming a partner in 1931. At Brown Brothers Harriman, Bush was instrumental in building and managing the firm's client relationships and investments, significantly increasing his wealth and influence in the financial world. His success on Wall Street provided the financial stability and connections that would later support his political career and help establish the Bush family as a prominent political dynasty. Bush's business acumen was not just beneficial for his personal gains but also played a pivotal role in setting up the financial groundwork for his family's future political activities, linking high finance with high politics. Prescott Bush's involvement with the Union Banking Corporation, UBC, during the 1930s and 1940s has been a source of significant controversy. The UBC, where Bush served as a director, managed the American assets of Fritz Thyssen, a German industrialist who was among the first major supporters of Adolf Hitler. Thyssen played a crucial role in funding the rise of the Nazi Party through his vast industrial empire. Documents from the National Archives reveal that the assets of the UBC were seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act in October 1942, citing the corporation's ties with Thyssen and the Nazi regime. The seizure of these assets by the U.S. government highlighted the intricate financial networks that linked American businesses with European politics during a tumultuous period.
Prescott was born into privilege and became extremely influential in business, intelligence, and politics. He helped establish the CIA out of the Army's Office of Strategic Services with the Dulles brothers and served as a senator in the state of Connecticut. However, during his time serving as one of the directors of Union Banking Corporation, he was doing business with Nazis.
The Bushes have been sort of at the heart of the military-industrial complex since its very beginning, and that Prescott was involved in a firm that actually fronted for Nazi firms in America.
In fact, Union Banking and its subsidiaries were seized by the United States government in October of 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act. After the war, the assets were returned, a few fines were paid, and it was swept under the rug of forgotten history. These Nazi ties should not be all that shocking, seeing as it has been declassified at the Office of Strategic Services recruited Nazis into its ranks through Project Paperclip in August of 1945.
My late father served in the Army Air Corps during World War II under the Office of Strategic Services, which became our Central Intelligence Agency. He served in Italy and came to Schenectady in 1945. My late mother served at the Pentagon. She was also a veteran and was able to prove her clandestine skills there and was recruited and sent to Germany, to Frankfurt, Germany, to serve in the Army Security Agency Signals Intelligence post World War II. During that time, Operation Paperclip and the recruitment of 1,500 Nazi scientists were being brought to America to start our space program.
Tonight, a special treat. Former California governor and action star Arnold Schwarzenegger sat down with CNN's Dana Bash
at this forum, and you said,
"And I was born with a father that was a Nazi." Think about that.
The air went out of the room. You used the story of your father to try to reach people who are getting sucked into groups that propagate hate.
Mm-hmm.
This is Aaron Milchan, a Hollywood billionaire who made his fortune selling arms to apartheid South Africa and who, according to FBI documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, is a traitor and should be tried for treason.
At an opening briefing, G20 summit organizers outlined the agenda. Numerous working groups discussing topics ranging from trade to climate change, all under the umbrella slogan, solidarity, equality, and sustainability. But there's a glaring omission among the guests. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, boycotting the event to protest what the Trump administration wrongly says are plans by the South African government to seize land from white farmers.
And Putin doesn't even have to rely on just Trump to make his NATO-hating dreams come true. He's also getting an assist from Elon Musk. I'm joined now by Mehdi Hassan, editor-in-chief and CEO of Zateo. The sad fact is, Mehdi, this country, our country, was influenced by exactly that. And so how right is Europe to worry?
This video will be about China's Belt and Road Initiative. China's One Belt, One Road strategy, announced by Chinese President Xi Jinping at the end of 2013, aims to create infrastructure links and commercial routes between China and the Middle East, Europe, and Africa via an overland belt and a maritime road.
Americans are being distracted. What is still going on is the UN and Vatican-sponsored Faith and Globalization Initiative. These are holy wars that are taking place in the Middle East for control of the Jordan Valley, the natural gas, the precious metals, the natural resources, our allies, the Vatican, the Jesuits, the Freemason Anglo-Catholic Knights of Malta, John G. Roberts, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, is a Knight of Malta. You got the Aga Khan Development Network, all these pipeline projects. You've got this Design Futures Council based in Washington, D.C. You've got the Roundtable Group. And, of course, you got the Nazi bankers, starting with the Prescott Bush family. All due to Elon Musk's support of the far-right neo-Nazi party in Germany. They doubled their support in this election. All thanks to Elon Musk visiting Germany and visiting this neo-Nazi party, as well as Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, met with the leader of AFD, and Europe is very concerned that these far-right fascist neo-Nazi organizations and political parties are going to grow now with Elon Musk, President Musk's support, and his Vice President Donald Trump, as well as J.D. Vance.
During his first international trip overseas as vice president, J.D. Vance has shown an inability or perhaps an unwillingness to acknowledge that horrors left unchecked are often doomed to repeat themselves. Vance didn't mention the Alternative for Germany party by name, but the same day he met with the group's leader. Mainstream German politicians have a long-standing agreement to freeze out the far-right group, an approach that Vance criticized in his speech. For decades, Germany has had mechanisms to shun out extremist political parties and to ban hate speech to prevent the rise of another Hitler. Well, it makes sense. But in the case of the AfD, it has at times downplayed the atrocities of the Holocaust under Hitler. Parts of the party have been classified as extremist by German intelligence, and members have been arrested in connection with multiple plots to overthrow the government. Steve Bannon, Trump's former top ally, said in an interview last month that Musk has proven that he has the money and influence to do so on a huge scale. In his words, there's not a centrist left-wing government in Europe that will be able to withstand that onslaught.
I want to tell you about a guy who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. He was born in 1897 in what we know as Palestine, and he died in 1974. But in 1937, he flip-flopped on the Allies, and he aligned himself with the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine against British rule. British mandate for Palestine, and he fled and he took refuge in Lebanon and afterwards in ancient Babylon, known today as Iraq. He established himself in fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini and with Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany Third Reich, which he collaborated with the Nazis during World War II. While requesting independence from Adolf Hitler, they had a face-to-face meeting, he then started training Adolf Hitler's Nazi SS Guard Muslims. He started recruiting to join the Nazis.
Is a photo of my grandfather. He's the one on the right. You can always tell which one he is in pictures because he's just a little bit chubbier than his twin brother. He and his family left Germany in 1938, which was about as late as you could leave if you were Jewish, and settled in New York City. When I asked him whether he was aware of what happened to the Jewish community he left behind, he said that he did not know about the fate of European Jewry until after the camps were liberated. Similarly, when Eisenhower marched through Buchenwald with all the most eminent congressmen and journalists in order to document what had been done, the general consensus seemed to be, how did we not know about this while it was happening? The only problem is, we did. This is a New York Times article from July 2nd, 1942. It reports the slaying of 700,000 Jews, 1/5 of the entire Jewish population of Poland. This account was typical. The information is factual, it's detailed, and it's even contemporaneous. And there were a lot of articles like this. Between 1939 and 1945, historian Laurel Leff counts 1,186 articles about the Holocaust in the New York Times. So that raises two questions. The first question is, how did this happen? And then the second question is, why did this happen? So first, how? The answer is that these articles were buried in the middle of the paper. This article appeared on page 6 under a small subheading reserved for unimportant material. This article, which described the same massacre as probably the greatest mass slaughter in history, was on page 5 and had no title at all. So then we ask, why? Well, it wasn't because the front page was full of momentous news. On the day that this story appeared in the New York Times, the front page featured articles about tennis shoes and canned fruit. So then we ask again, why? The answer is Arthur Hayes Sulzberger. Arthur Hayes Sulzberger was the controlling owner and publisher of the New York Times. And what made it so surprising is that he was Jewish. But the fact that his family dated back to 18th century America and that he had a long and aristocratic heritage made him feel like he had no connection to the threatened mass of European Jews. Sulzberger wrote, "There is no common denominator between the poor, unfortunate Jew being driven around what was recently Poland and Mr. Leslie Hoare Belisha, that's the British Secretary of War, who was also a Sephardic Jew, and myself. Certainly in Poland, this Jew is part of a recognized minority. Mr. Hoare Belisha and I, fortunately, are in no such category." Sulzberger's dissociation from European Jews was further enforced by his religious ideology. His grandfather-in-law, Isaac Wise, founded classical Reform Judaism in America, which is not to be confused with modern Reform Judaism. Classical Reform Judaism promotes the idea that Jews are not a people, a nation, or a race, but simply followers of a religion. Sulzberger viewed the situation of European Jews through the prism of his Reform Judaism. Because he did not see the Jews as a race, he could not comprehend that Hitler was targeting them as a race, specifically an inferior race akin to vermin. And time after time, Sulzberger's views are reflected in New York Times editorials, in which the plight of the Jews is not highlighted specifically. Sulzberger thought that Jews should not be persecuted as Jews, nor rescued as Jews. What he failed to take into account is that it was not he and his fellow Reform Jews who were driving history at that moment, but rather Hitler and the Third Reich. The second reason that Sulzberger influenced his editors and writers to downplay the Holocaust was his fear that the New York Times would be considered a Jewish paper and lose credibility. The voice from the abyss did not reach the ears of the whole world. The New York Times included that voice in their paper, but they drowned it in a cacophony of other voices, and ignoring the patterns of a genocide, they refused to add their own clarion call for action. Some stories are too important to be whispered. To quote historian Laurel Leff, "If the world is to have even a chance to hear, the press must shout."
Was later coined the ship that launched a nation, the Exodus 1947, the icon of movies and books and Zionist lore. Some 4,550 refugees, Holocaust survivors, setting off across the Mediterranean just 2 years removed from the fires of Europe. And on July 18, 1947, reaching Haifa, only to be turned back by the British then in control of the country.
Both the Christian and Hebrew Bibles clearly state, "Do not take advantage of foreigners who live among you." In Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 through 34, I'm going to give you the New Living Translation, which is easier to understand. Verse 33. "Do not take advantage of foreigners who live among you in your land." Verse 34. "Treat them like native-born Israelites and love them as you love yourself. Remember that you were once foreigners living in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
And we started in verse 21, realizing that this was the beginning of the tribulation. It says, in his estate, in the estate of the former king of the north, shall a vile person stand up, who they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Chapter 11, verse 36. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, and that determined shall be done.
So, folks, we don't know who the world's final Antichrist is, but I would definitely tell you to start reading ourdailybread.org, odb.org, get into the Bible, compare the Bible, sacred history, redemptive history, and restorative history to secular history, to current events, and to the history of the last 120 years.
The paper leaves become wings, carrying my prayers to the celestial throne. The guitars burst divine secrets. Harmony celebrates unmatched grace. Oh, Jesus, my Savior.